from Abuja.
Hello, thank you for being a part of our show. We appreciate you. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and this is Magnus Kpakol GVA, Global Views Africa. As always, it's all about how we can raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. In view today, income inequality and economic growth. Throughout the world, all nations seem to want stronger economic growth. But the forces that drive growth also appear to be the very forces that raise income inequality. Today we will hear some strong views from various sources, including Oxfam, the global charity, Senator Bernie Sanders, a U.S. presidential candidate, and others on how income inequality is bad for trust in our society's well-being. But before that, in our hidden economics, political gamblers, how they try their luck, jumping back and forth between parties. Now, up next in our quick view, we rank countries on how peaceful they are. That's coming right up. As it is now obvious, the world has become less peaceful over the past few years. There's something called the Global Peace Index, GPI. It is published annually by the Institute for Economics and Peace, based in Sydney, New York, and Mexico City. The GPI ranks the nations of the world according to the level of peacefulness. The index gauges global peace using three broad themes: the level of safety and security in society, the extent of domestic and international conflict, and the degree of militarization. In this connection, which among the following countries is the most peaceful? Chile, Sweden, Canada, and Germany. Which of the following African countries joins with Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan to round out the top 4 least peaceful countries in the world? Central African Republic, Sudan, South Sudan, and Somalia. Stay with us for our answers coming up shortly. Still in view, income inequality and economic growth. Can Africa provide inclusive growth if it resumes its recent speed in economic growth? Lessons from around the world tend to suggest that without adequate measures, strong contemporary economic growth can raise income inequality. We will look into this. But up next in our hidden economics, political gamblers, can their luck run out?
Cards just right. He wanted everything he played. Kentucky gambler had it made, and he should have quit and gone on home that night.
Dolly Parton, the country music legend, in her 1974 hit song, Kentucky Gambler, sings about a man who left his home in Kentucky, wanting to get lucky and get rich quick in the casinos of Reno, Nevada. In politics, we have seen them or heard of them jumping back and forth from one party to the other, looking to gain quick preeminence and fortunes. Why do politicians, especially those in Nigeria, do that? If the politician is driven by political ideology or the search for political space to make meaningful contribution to the political process for the sake of making good economic, political, and social impact, then it is good politics. But if the politician merely jumps to where there is good inordinate personal gain, then that is gambling. Political gambling, that's what that is. Paying a small price in the jump and hoping for a big personal gain. Yes, Winston Churchill of Great Britain was notorious for switching back and forth between parties Of course, sometimes even being tossed out. Apparently, he was looking for appropriate space and voice, because ultimately he learned to stick to one party and became one of the greatest war presidents in his persistence to never quit against the Nazis, about whom he had constantly berated the UK government for appeasing. Apparently, all along, he had a clear political position. Many politicians, especially in Nigeria, change parties simply for personal gain. Often they will even invoke ethnic or religious sentiments, claiming they are shifting because their people are being marginalized, only to get there and at best throw crumbs to the very people. Politicians who have a clear ideology or position on an issue would do well to espouse them. The electorate is getting more and more savvy and able to listen to and understand electoral candidates. They will vote for you if they come to understand and identify with your position, as they recently did for now President Muhammadu Buhari in Nigeria. If you are just gambling, hoping to strike it rich in the other political party, realize that for the potential payoff in the gamble, there are associated costs. Not all those gamblers who go to Las Vegas or Reno come back with smiles on their faces. Often Lady Luck will lead you on. She'll stay with you for a while, and then she's gone. If you lose in a new party, the cost often is that you wind up taking a position much farther in the back of the line in the old party. Indeed, watch out, because sometimes it could result in the end of your political career.
You think about it.
Our hidden economics for you.
Kentucky gambler. Yeah, you think about it.
Before we start our discussion in view, here are our quick view answers. If you are looking for the most peaceful country in the world, it is Iceland, followed by Denmark, Austria, and New Zealand. However, Canada, ranking number 7 in the world in peacefulness, is the most peaceful country among the 4 listed here. South Sudan is the only African country listed among the least peaceful countries in the world, ranking as the 4th least peaceful country in the world. To contact us for adverts and sponsorship, please see our information displayed on the screen. The things that raise income inequality tend to also be the same things that speed economic growth in a country. Although with a Gini coefficient of between 43 and 48%, Nigeria is not one of the most offending countries in income inequality. Now reckon South Africa has a Gini coefficient of 65%, one of the worst in the world. But things could get worse in Nigeria if inclusive growth strategies are not put in place. Can we learn lessons from comments from other parts of the world? Oxfam, the international charity, has just released a report claiming that the wealthiest 62 people in the world now own as much wealth as half the world's population. This means that only 62 people, often called the super rich, half of them in the United States, own as much wealth as some 3.5 billion people in the world. Please join us as we see what exactly Oxfam had to say.
So our new report shows that there are just 62 super rich billionaires who now own the same wealth as the poorest half of the world put together. That's 3.6 billion people. And the research also shows that the richest 1% of people now own more than the other 99% of us put together. So most of the world's poorest people are still in Asia, in Africa, Though obviously poverty is a very real thing in almost every single country on earth now. So we want to see political leaders showing the bravery and the conviction to tackle vested interests and to make policies, to make laws that work for everybody and not just for this tiny but very powerful minority. But the bottom line is all of us have to pay our fair share of tax, and that's not a matter of choice for most of us. Most of us pay our fair share because we want to and because we have to. It's only the world's richest individuals and the world's biggest companies who even have this choice to hire these armies of tax lawyers and accountants to hide their money offshore. If people really want to contribute to society, then they should be contributing their taxes.
Senator Bernie Sanders, a U.S. Democratic presidential candidate, has a campaign video on income and wealth inequality in the United States. He believes the U.S. middle class is disappearing and argues for a minimum wage increase to as much as $15 per hour from the current rate of $7.25. Let's listen to what Senator Sanders has to say.
The economic reality for most Americans is pretty clear. For the last 40 years, the American middle class has been disappearing, and more Americans are living in poverty than at almost any point in our nation's history. Today, real median family income is almost $5,000 less than it was in 1999. Today, the typical male worker is making $783 less last year than he did 42 years ago after adjusting for inflation. The typical female worker is making $1,337 less than she did in 2007. Despite the modest gains of the Affordable Care Act, 35 million Americans continue to have no health insurance, and even more are underinsured. And today, embarrassingly, the United States of America has by far the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major industrialized country on earth. And while the middle class continues to disappear, over the last 2 years, just as an example, the wealthiest 15 Americans in this country, 15 people, and that includes Bill Gates, the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, and a bunch of others. These guys have seen their wealth increase by $170 billion. That's just an increase in what they previously had in a 2-year period. To put this in perspective, that increase in wealth for the top 15 Americans is more wealth than is owned by the bottom 40% of our people, and it is double what this country spends on nutrition programs to feed over 40 million Americans. Meanwhile, since 2005, the typical middle-class family has seen its wealth go down by more than 36%, from $130,000 in 2005 to just $81,000 today. We have witnessed an enormous transfer of wealth from the middle class and the poor to multimillionaires and billionaires. Since 1985, the share of our nation's wealth owned by the bottom 90% has plummeted from 36% to just 23%. Now, what does this mean? It means that if the bottom 90%, the vast majority of our people, had simply maintained the same share of wealth they had 30 years ago, they would have over $10 trillion more today than they in fact do have. Now, where did that wealth go? Well, about $8 trillion of it has gone to a tiny sliver of the wealthiest people in our country. Over the past 30 years, the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1%, has seen its share of our nation's wealth more than double, from 10% to 22%. The very, very rich are getting incredibly richer, the middle class is disappearing, and the poor are getting poorer. That is the tragic reality of our economy today.
Richard Wilkinson has his strong views on how increasing income disparity leads to deterioration in social relations. Here is Mr. Wilkinson.
I want to start, though, with a paradox. This shows you life expectancy against gross national income, how rich countries are on average. And you see the countries on the right, like Norway and the USA, are twice as rich as Israel, Greece, Portugal on the left. And it makes no difference to their life expectancy at all. There's no suggestion of a relationship there. But if we look within our societies, there are extraordinary social gradients in health, running right across society. This again is life expectancy. These are small areas of England and Wales, the poorest on the right, the richest on the left. Not a difference between the poor and the rest of us. Even the people just below the top have less good health than the people at the top. So income means something very important within our societies and nothing between them. And you see in the more equal countries on the left, Japan, Finland, Norway, Sweden, the top 20% are about 3.5, 4 times as rich as the bottom 20%. But at the more unequal end, UK, Portugal, USA, Singapore, the differences are twice as big. On that measure, we are twice as unequal as some of the other successful market democracies. Now I'm going to show you what that does to our societies. We collected data on problems with social gradients, the kind of problems that are more common at the bottom of the social ladder. Internationally comparable data on life expectancy, on kids' maths and literacy scores, on infant mortality rates, homicide rates, proportion of the population in prison, teenage birth rates, levels of trust, obesity, mental illness, which in the standard diagnostic classification includes drug and alcohol addiction, and social mobility. We put them here all in one index. They're all weighted equally. Where a country is a sort of average score on these things. And there you see it in relation to the measure of inequality I've just shown you, which I shall use over and over again in the data. The more unequal countries doing worse on all these kinds of social problems. We were a little bit worried that people might think we'd been choosing problems to suit our argument and just manufactured this evidence. So we also looked we did a paper in the British Medical Journal on the UNICEF Index of Child Wellbeing. It has 40 different components put together by other people. It contains whether kids can talk to their parents, whether they have books at home, what immunization rates are like, whether there's bullying at school. Everything goes into it. Here it is in relation to that same measure of inequality. Kids doing worse in the more unequal societies, highly significant relationship. But once again, if you look at that measure of child well-being in relation to national income per person, there's no relationship, no suggestion of a relationship. What all the data I've shown you so far says is the same thing. The average well-being of our societies is not dependent any longer on national income and economic growth. That's very important in poorer countries, but not in the rich developed world.
United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is focused on the many injustices in the U.S. economy and believes that income inequality is a drag on the economy. She also favors raising the minimum wage.
Well, I think there's a huge issue in the country about income inequality and lack of opportunity. And, you know, if you're talking about an inner city where it's more likely that a young African-American male is going to go to jail than graduate from college, that's a huge problem. And we have to fix that. So there's injustice throughout our economy, throughout opportunity, throughout access to education. The fact that young kids aren't getting universal pre-K in too many cities, aren't getting even universal kindergarten. Access to affordable daycare is harming our future for our children in every part of this country. And I think in terms of Wall Street and banking, the worst thing in the world for America is to have another financial collapse. So there are legitimate issues that need to be reviewed to make sure we have the right oversight and accountability over our banking institutions, to make sure the rating agencies are being held accountable for how their play in the financial collapse. Because we want the financial markets to always be there for us, to fund our businesses, to fund the economy. And so I think both areas, both sides of that coin are legitimate areas for debate and discussion.
Economists typically measure income inequality by something called the Gini coefficient, which ranges from 0 to 100 in percentage terms. A score of 0 indicates there is perfect equality in income distribution. A score of 100 reflects perfect inequality. Here are some coefficient results. So from this we can see that income distribution is more unequal in South Africa, in Brazil, than in Nigeria. But sometimes the problem with inequality is not so much with the level, but rather with the change in the level. When inequality starts to rise, it gets easily noticed, even in countries where the Gini coefficient is very low. Although China has a relatively low income inequality, the rise recently has been very sharp, about 4 times that in neighboring Taiwan, as economic growth has been much faster in China. As studies by the World Economic Forum have shown, it appears the factors that speed economic growth are the same ones that raise income inequality. This seems to make sense. After all, the fastest growing economies have been those that have experienced rapid capital accumulation and a globalized economy. And for sure, what these factors do is to reduce the participation of unskilled labor. This means the stronger economic returns will go mostly to highly skilled workers and the owners of capital, and at the expense of unskilled labor. To worsen matters, there's now something called miniaturization, where big mainframe machines and computers are being replaced by much smaller devices, as with our notepads and smartphones that can do a myriad of high-tech jobs. With the bigger machines, someone could set things up for you to process. But now you have to operate your smart device yourself. You must know how to use your little smartphone for navigation, faxes, research, and video conferencing, among others. Our policymakers must constantly devise approaches for reskilling and upskilling. There must also be well thought through safety net strategies for marketplace and out-of-marketplace activities. Sometimes policymakers appear to forget that often entrepreneurs have to be taught how to export. You will be surprised that globalization can actually be good for everyone if the people, all the people, are exposed to the robust market opportunities provided by globalization. This is where the Red in Africa strategies we are promoting here at the EBS can be very useful. Unfortunately, African central governments apparently have not developed appropriate mechanisms to use in partnership with the communities that make up their nations. I contend that central governments that act in helicopter fashion over states, provinces, or municipalities will find only limited success in trying to create inclusive growth with job creation. Hovering up above can never be a substitute for hands-on engagement with communities. Community economic sensitization and development is where it all starts to achieve inclusive economic growth. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and that's my view.